Welcome, everybody. Dr. Pete here. Today's episode on the first day of 2023. Mitochondrial dysfunction is a driver of gout, and we start right now. I am Dr. Pete. I have a PhD in biochemistry. I have leveraged everything that I have learned about molecular biology and a 28-year teaching career in the area of chemistry to look for a solution to the gout disease and to provide strategies to my subscribers so they can successfully put gout in remission. And today's episode is relatively short. We are going to focus on this new topic, which has to do with how the mitochondria is most likely involved in driving gout flares. So we have the metabolics that are going on, the deadly triad that I've talked about before. This is alcohol, hyperglycemia, and added sugar, fructose, along with recently discussions that I've started talking about sleep apnea, which brings in the hypoxic component to this. Remember that the joint, the articular cartilage, does not have its own circulatory system. So oxygen, along with nutrients and so on, must diffuse into the joint in order to be utilized there by the biological cells, mainly the chondrocyte that is responsible for maintaining the health of the joint. And because the joint does not have its own circulatory system, nutrients, including oxygen, have to diffuse to their location. And therefore, the joint itself has a hypoxic gradient. What that means is that the closer the cells are to the synovial membrane, which separates the fluid and the other molecules and whatnot that compose the joint, those cells that are closest to the circulatory system will have access to the majority of the nutrients coming in, and including oxygen. And then as you move further away from that zone, the concentration of oxygen goes down, the concentration of nutrients goes down, and so on. So there is a gradient. The closer you are to the circulatory system, the more access you have to nutrients and so on. And everything moves down a concentration gradient as you move into the interior of the joint. Then this has consequences for the health of the joint, and in the long run, this has consequences, the knowledge of which gout sufferers, including myself, we can use that knowledge to improve our ability to put gout in remission. And in today's topic, I want to talk about or introduce the topic of the mitochondria, because the mitochondria, as in most cases of chronic disease, may well be the captain of this dysregulation, these events that downstream lead to this chorus of chronic diseases, of which when we're talking about a joint, we're talking about things like gout, osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, down the road we go. When we're talking more systemically, right, where we have the involvement of the liver, and I think that the liver actually is involved in gout too, but what I'm trying to say is that fructose uric acid metabolism in combination with the glycemia, right, the glycolysis and the hyperglycemia and whatnot, these metabolic pathways that are being hyperactivated together, then downstream we have the dysregulation at the level of the mitochondria. And we are learning now, especially going forward in 2023, that the mitochondria has a much bigger role to play than just the fact that it produces energy, right? It has a leadership role. It seems to be closely associated with the nucleus of the cells. For example, if we're talking about the liver, then the metabolism going on in the liver, the mitochondria in connection with the nucleus is probably running the show on this. Right? When we move to the brain and we talk about Alzheimer's and the influence of fructose uric acid metabolism there, again, I want to emphasize, we can't talk about this stuff in isolation. We have to talk about these pathways and how they're integrated with one another. So we have to talk about glycolysis and how glucose is processed in relationship to what's going on with fructose uric acid. And in the brain and the mitochondria there, most likely the mitochondria is running that show too, right? Because all this dysfunction in the metabolic pathway, the systemic inflammation, the disruption of nitric oxide pathways when we're dealing with hyperglycemia, high levels of fructose, and a hypoxic event potentially because of sleep apnea, that is all going to roll downstream to the mitochondria where we're going to have reprogramming going on. And this reprogramming leads to mitochondrial dysfunction, which then will drive these disease states. Now, before we get into the meat of the issue in terms of how this affects a gout sufferer, I want to remind you guys that I have the Gout Intensive coming up on January 21st, starting at 8 a.m. And today is the last day that you can get early bird pricing. And starting tomorrow, the cost of this event, of this a very important intervention for those of us that are suffering from gout, the price for that it will go up, right? So today is your last day to get the early bird pricing, and I would love it if you would sign up. So what is the intensive about? So a lot of people have asked me this. It's not a run-of-the-mill masterclass, right? That is what it is not. The Gout Intensive is interventional. I have been asked over the last 4 years at this point by hundreds of people, how can you help me put gout in remission, Dr. Pete? And this is my answer. This is the way I can reach more of you that are out there and help you obtain this gout remission and to be able to end the pain of these flares. And the way that we're going to do this is basically what I committed to you guys a long time ago. I stick to the science. And over 4 years, I've been able to accumulate a lot of it. So it's a 4-hour initial event. And in that, we're going to talk about the current state of the art in regard to what I think is causing or what is causal for the gout flare. Then we're going to talk about knowing that information, what can we do? What strategies can we use to push back against those causal pressures? What can we do to reverse the situation? All right. And then the third part of it is the practical aspects of then applying those strategic ideas to putting gout in remission and having a pain-free lifestyle after the fact, right, for the rest of our lives. That's what this is about. And it includes a lot of deliverables, 30-day meal plan, food lists, and so on. The sessions that we have together that morning for 4 hours are going to be recorded. So you will have access to that in a Dropbox for as long as you want to. There's not going to be any deadline with that. Also, the deliverables will be put there, so you will have access to those going forward. And then for a month afterwards, there will be 4 1-hour sessions, group coaching, so you can come back and you can ask questions. Well, this is what I've been doing, Dr. Pete. This is working, this isn't working, and I will be there with you, and we will talk about, all right, let's see what we can think about here to do things differently to get the remission, right? So there will be a month of that. And then there's also going to be the opening of a private WhatsApp channel just for you guys. And that is lifelong. There's not going to be an end of it. So you'll have chatting, the ability to chat with me when you need help going forward indefinitely. So go to www.drpetesgoutintensive.com. Sign up today. We'd really love to have you. Last day of early bird pricing. All right, now let's get to the content for today. So the issue is, and this has been sitting out there now for 4 years, right? I talk about how when you have the situation with a hyperglycemic meal, you have added sugars coming in with the fructose, and you have alcohol all showing up at the liver at the same time. This is that concept of having a large number of calories, all of these different macronutrients arriving at the liver at the same time, and hyperactivating glycolysis, which causes the pushing of the excess glucose over into endogenous fructose, where it then enters into the fructose biochemistry there. The added sugar with, I call it exogenous fructose, coming in, which comes in directly. Remember, fructose uric acid pathway, unlike glycolysis, the fructose uric acid pathway is unregulated. So I've talked about this analogy before. If you think about the liver, and if somebody's having a low carb meal, for example, then there is this incoming glucose. It's not hyperglycemic, and the function of glucose is to produce ATP to fill up the glycogen stores so that we have energy going down the road. And if there is a slight excess, the additional glucose there is pushed into the production of fat. Now, when we overload the system, what's going to happen is the glucose piles up at the front end of glycolysis, and the glycolysis pathway is overloaded. The excess glucose gets pushed via polyol pathway. It's a two-step process into endogenous fructose. We have the incoming added sugar that has the fructose in it. So we have the combination of exogenous fructose. This is the fructose coming in from the meal itself, and then the fructose is converted from the glucose. Up to 30% of that glucose is pushed over into the endogenous fructose. Then that fructose together and collectively in an unregulated fashion basically is going to collapse into the sudden acute rise in uric acid on an intracellular basis, with a decimation of ATP in the cell and also the phosphate. And this translates into an elevation of systemic inflammation, the disruption of nitric oxide pathway, and a reprogramming of the liver into de novo lipogenesis. So basically what that means in English is that the liver is going to stop burning, right? We're going to stop burning this incoming material to produce ATP and to do other things that the burning pathway does. And instead now we're storing everything that's coming in. And we have basically this growth pattern, which we know when that is activated on a chronic level is where we end up with the dysfunction. And ultimately that starts with the captain of the dysfunction, which is the mitochondria. And that's really an introduction to what we're going to talk about today, is what's going on with the mitochondria. So remember, when we go back to the gout, the issue of the gout, this is my hypothesis. And the last time I was here, I talked about early data that actually supports this. We're going to go back and review that quickly in a minute. But the idea is that we have the biologically important cell inside the joint, the chondrocyte. And the function of the chondrocyte is to maintain the extracellular matrix there, the lubrication, all the things that you need for a healthy joint. But with years and years of the deadly triad and potentially the sleep apnea, which can be associated with those conditions happening on a chronic level, we know that the chondrocyte can be pushed into a state of low-grade inflammation. And in low-grade inflammation, basically that cell is primed for a particular event. And a couple of things that seem to be going on when the chondrocyte is in that state is the intracellular production of uric acid. And that uric acid will be pushed out into the extracellular environment around the chondrocyte. And this is an important thing to think about. And then we're also going to have the production of IL-1 beta. And I believe that as part of this situation, if you will, is that the IL-1 beta is responsible for recruiting the innate immune system. This is going to be the macrophage. And the macrophage is going to be interacting at once, not only with the IL-1 beta, but also with the uric acid, which may or may not be crystallized. I'm going to come back to this earlier hypothesis in a second that was published in 1975, which is really important to us. There was a lot of high quality science that was done in this area that, for whatever reason, has been forgotten, or at least not paid attention to, but I am paying attention to it. So let's take a look at that hypothesis, because it's really important to this, right? Because once the macrophage gets involved with this, and once we have crystalline uric acid there, then the macrophage is going to respond to that by inducing this inflammatory event, which involves other immune cells, the neutrophils, and so on. But this is how we get to the gout flare. So this is the hypothesis that was developed in 1975 by Wilcox and Califf. And the idea here is that you have a chondrocyte which is producing monosodium urate. And in the process of this low-grade inflammation, one of the things that we know about the chondrocyte, we also know this about the macrophage, is that both of these cells are specialized in glycolysis. And under conditions of hyperglycemia, both the chondrocyte and the macrophage are going to push glycolysis towards the overproduction of lactate. And once lactate is leaked into the extracellular space that is surrounding the chondrocyte, this causes an increase in acidity, which these guys were able to show via high-quality research causes a disruption of the proteoglycans there, degradation, along with degrading enzymes that are there, right? And I've talked about some of those in my previous discussions, like MMP3, for example. And in the process of that, we have the release of calcium. Mechanical disruption. So say you stub your toe really, really bad, or historically that happened at some point, like it did with me, preceding my gout flare by a number of years. This mechanical disruption can also lead to this pH decline that we're talking about here, and also the rise in intracellular ionic calcium. The main point, the reason we're talking about this acidity and the calcium is because the hard part of crystallizing uric acid is the actual nucleation event. This is the rate limiting step. And it explains why, when you step back from this and you think about the hyperuricemia data, right? Hyperuricemic data. That's the 43 million people that are walking around with high uric acid that don't necessarily get gout and don't necessarily form monosodium urate crystals in their joints, probably has more to do with what we're talking about right now than any other single issue. That you must have these local conditions, right? The release of the calcium and the acidic conditions locally in order for the monosodium urate to nucleate. And then once you have the nucleation, you can get growth of the crystals. Once we have the crystals, then they can systematically interact with the macrophage that I show over there on the right side. And then we go down the slippery slope that I talked about on the last slide and end up in the gout flare. And this is just a depiction of that event. I pulled this. Let me just give you the proper reference. This was from a 2002 paper, Mobashiri et al., that focused on the metabolism of chondrocytes. And it is an old reference, but what I like about it is they have some really good diagrams where they put this together. And so you can see the collagen strands in there, and you can also see proteoglycan. So this is just putting together now in a simpler format what we just talked about. You have a chondrocyte that's suffering from low-grade inflammation, acidification of the extracellular environment around that, the release of IL-1 beta. You have the attraction of the innate immune system. And I have another reference for that from today. which is what I wanted to talk about here. If I can quickly find that reference, okay, that comes from Early et al. And this is a paper that was published in 2021, which is proposing that the mitochondria is at the center of this stuff, because we have what I believe is a metabolic issue going on. And at the center of metabolic dysfunction is the mitochondria, how the mitochondria is responding inside the cell to these conditions that are happening. Which conditions am I talking about? I'm talking about the hyperglycemia, the role of fructose, the role of the hypoxia, and so on, because those have a profound effect on how these cells are metabolizing. And I say these cells because we can't look at the chondrocyte in isolation. We have to consider what's going on with the cells of the innate immune system, because they are being subjected to the same metabolic conditions as the chondrocyte. And remember what I've said in the past, the danger of isolating these things is exactly the reason why we are where we're at now in 2023 and still suffering from gout. Basically, we need to be able to step back, big picture, and try to understand what's going on with these cells in the joint in order to come up with strategies to get the gout remission. So I know for certain the macrophage is operating in parallel metabolically to a lot of the factors that I've talked about here with the chondrocyte. The hyperglycemia, for example, that we see hundreds of papers in the realm of osteoarthritis that talk about the low-grade inflammation of not only the chondrocyte, but also the effects that this has on residential macrophages. The main thing that I believe about this hypothesis is that the low-grade inflammation we have going on with the chondrocyte is where we begin with the recruitment of the innate immune system. And then when we have the right conditions for the gout flare, the formation of crystalline uric acid, which in this diagram, I blackened the crystal so it would be easier to see. These crystals aren't really black, but I blackened this to get the contrast so you could see it better. We have the acidification, the IL-1 beta, and the increased calcium, which is driving one of the drivers of this cascade. Now, this is from the 2021 paper, and what is really intriguing about this is that from Early et al., I think that's what it is, 2021, is that these guys are really talking about the role of the mitochondria. And what I like a lot about this paper is that they're looking at this from the big picture. And we can learn as gout sufferers a lot from this, because they talk about the fact in this paper that the chondrocyte and the signaling that is released from the chondrocyte because of the metabolic dysfunction going on there, right? The pressures that are coming onto the chondrocyte through the, in my own words, the deadly triad, exposure, can lead to the attraction of the innate immune system. And then downstream of that is where we can get the gout flare. So this is a prelude of some of the things that we're really going to focus on in the gout intensive, because as I've said, I made a commitment to this 4 years ago when I got started down this road of trying to understand gout, that we would consistently look at the science. We would consistently see if we could distill that down into certain parameters that we could then turn around and develop strategies so that we could change our lifestyle, figure out what's going on here, change our lifestyle, and then reduce the probability of gout flares going forward into the future. And so I would encourage all of you, please join me for the Gout Intensive. Today's last day of early bird pricing. www.drpetesgoutintensive.com. I hope to see you on the 21st of January, and everyone have a great New Year's Day. This is 2023. Let's put gout in remission. And that's it for today. I will see you guys next time.